A big week for Danielle Smith and for Mark Carney, and maybe a big win for all Canadians as Steven Guilbeault heads for the exit. An update from the Halifax Security Forum and whatever else crosses our minds. It's the Lime Podcast. It took a while. Like, how long were we sitting around, Jen, waiting for, oh, there's going to be a pipeline announcement? Was that like 3 weeks of our lives of just sitting around waiting?
This got hyped. This was hyped. This was leaked.
Yeah, it got
We've been
hyped.
hearing about
That's
this
true.
one. And this wasn't even like, oh, I was hearing rumors. Like, no, I think like people had actually reported on the rumors in multiple mainstream news outlets. So
Yeah.
like this took a while. But the timing of all of this particular pipeline announcement was also pretty worth noting. Matt, do you just want to roll back the tape for half a second and explain what happened this week to people who haven't been paying attention?
I mean, that half includes me. But here's the thrust of it. So we've been hearing for weeks that there was going to be an announcement of some kind of a deal between the federal government and Alberta. A few weeks ago, there was that second major tranche of major projects office announcements. And that was when the rumor was that there was going to be a pipeline. There was going to be a pipeline. And then that rumor got watered down a little bit. No, there won't be, but there will be one soon. So what happened yesterday, and we're recording this, we usually mention that. It is November 28th, 2025. Sorry, should have mentioned that a minute ago. On Thursday, which was yesterday, the Alberta government and the federal government signed what they're calling the Memorandum of Understanding. Alberta is being assuaged, I guess is the right term. The clean electricity standard is either being waived entirely or it's being delayed. Some carbon price, industrial emitters is not being eliminated, but it's going to be postponed pending renegotiation. The federal government is signing up with its support. I don't understand the technicalities of this. You might better, of the pathways carbon capture thing. But all these are things like Alberta is getting all this stuff from the feds. All they've really had to commit to is renegotiating the industrial carbon price. And the Albertans are actually spinning that as, hey, this is good. We're going to renegotiate it. And in exchange for this, the federal government is saying it is prepared to accelerate using its federal powers, a new pipeline to the BC coast. Couple conditions, though. One of them is that you've got to get buy-in from BC. That includes the provincial government and some of the Indigenous groups. The other one is that there has to be a commercial partner, because you'll remember, we've talked about this 1,000 times before. The feds had to build TMX. Like when the commercial partners pulled out, the feds came in, bought the Trans Mountain pipeline and finish it. I don't think Carney wants to do that again. So so that's the summary, Jen, and you can correct anything you thought I got wrong, but I'll put this to you. How is it playing in Alberta? Are these being read as reasonable conditions or as poison pills?
Okay, so a couple points. One is that I think both sides have actually made some significant and important concessions to one another in all of this. The one big thing that Alberta did get, as far as I understand, is the removal of the emissions cap. That was a huge selling point. The other thing that Alberta absolutely needs to see before a pipeline is even a pipe dream, is the tanker ban. So the former bill I believe it was C69. Oh my gosh, my brain. Yep. Is it C69?
Brain mush.
I think it was.
I think it was, or maybe 59. I don't remember. There was a lot of bills. They were all bad.
There needs to be some sort of wiggle room on the tanker ban, because of course, if you have a pipeline to the West Coast and you have some kind of active tanker ban, you can't take it anywhere. So those two things are big sticking points. The second thing that I would say is anything that requires a province to sign off on a matter of interprovincial jurisdiction, which should rightly belong with the federal government, is, in my opinion,
dumb.
Not only is it dead in the water, but it's an abrogation of the crucial underpinning that underlies confederation. There is no point in us pretending that we are one nation, a confederation, if the federal government says, I'm no longer going to do my job on stuff that's politically hard, right? So ultimately, we know that pipelines that cross provincial borders automatically fall under federal jurisdiction. It's under the letter of the law. It's up to the federal government to approve or not approve those pipelines. In recent years, as pipelines became very politically contentious, rightly or wrongly, what we've seen is provinces like BC and Quebec in particular say, well, no, I demand a veto power, or I demand some kind of practical veto power, or I will use some version of lawfare or regulatory capture, or the ability to like sign off local permits on, electricity to your local pumping station to give my province the effect of a veto if I don't get the conditions that I want. And this has basically made it impossible to build anything in this country for the last 10 years. Because you can never get social license for this among all of the potential actors and players. You're never going to get NDP leader David Eby to sign off, no matter how good or sane the proposal is. And the reason why is because Eby has his own local political considerations. And those local political considerations are going to trump every other thing, including the very confederation that underpins Canada itself. Yeah. And this is why pipelines are and need to be a federal jurisdiction. People like me have been screaming about this stuff for years, because I'm like, look, if we're going to basically give provinces veto power over stuff like pipelines, we're packing it in. Because now essentially there is no national interest. There is no putting the idea of what's good for the nation above what's good for the individual provinces. There's no point in continuing to pretend we have a federal government that has real jurisdiction over this thing. And essentially all we're going to all that will lead to in the long run is a transactional tit for tat between provinces that are going to increasingly act like independent nation states. And that's just what's going to happen. It's what is happening. It's what is happening, right? So I think that any kind of MOU that requires Eby to sign off, so effectively that is what's happening. So look, do I think an MOU that says that, for example, a future hypothetical pipeline is going to make its way to the Major Projects Office and probably get an accelerated, i.e. sane regulatory approval from the federal government is a win for Alberta? Yes and no. Yes, it is kind of a win for Alberta. Alberta got some really important concessions here. I think it's also a win for Carney, because it demonstrates to the rest of the country that this is a real shift from the Trudeau era approach to pipelines and environmental regulation. I think that it demonstrates a seriousness to the rest of the country that no, we are going to take our economic diversification from the United States very seriously. But the other reason why I think that this is potentially a win for Carney, and this is where I get real cynical in all of this, is that Carney now just gets to wipe his hands of this. He gets to say, you know what?
We did our part.
Signed off. We did our part. Yeah. I signed off on this in principle. And if Danielle Smith and David Eby spend the next 5 years fighting between them about a pipeline, now all of a sudden the enemy's not Ottawa, the enemy's BC.
Yeah. Right.
So then this gets a bit of a distraction from the separatist movement for the federal government, and the federal government just gets to say, your problem. So Carney has effectively created the hypothetical conditions in which two of his biggest problems in the form of premiers, essentially spend the next couple of years fighting each other and not him.
I agree.
It's a win for him either way. Either a pipeline gets built and he gets to say, look, we were serious and we signed on board with the necessary actions, and look, we're different from the Trudeau government. Or a pipeline doesn't get built and problematic Smith spends the next 5 years fighting with problematic Eby and are off his tail, right? It's a win for him either way.
What I'm wondering about, and I completely accept your premise, and I'm going to actually add another win condition, but I'm going to do it in a minute because I think it'll make more sense to talk about it later. But what I'm wondering about now, and this is me being, see, you said a minute ago you were being cynical. Now watch me be cynical. Someone has to be the one who gets shot to encourage the others. Mm-hmm. And Carney so far has been offering carrots. The Major Projects Office is, hey, we're saying to industry, we're going to speed up your approvals process. Working with Alberta and particularly, hey, to your point, we're going to lift the emissions cap. We're going to spare you the clean electricity phase in, blah, blah, blah. These are the carrots. Sooner or later, somebody needs to get the stick.
Yep.
And again, nothing but love for my friends out west. But if I'm Carney and I'm thinking about which province I'm going to give the stick to, there's actually a pretty rational argument that it should be British Columbia if you're the federal Liberals.
Look, do you want to live in a confederation or not? Because if you want to live in a confederation, somebody's going to have to get told no. And somebody's going to have to not have to like it. And you know what? Reasonably speaking, you're going to give the stick to BC before you're going to give it to Quebec.
I was just about to say, Ontario's too big and too powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Quebec is too troublesome.
Mm-hmm.
Alberta's too angry.
Mm-hmm.
The Atlantic, and we're going to talk about Halifax in a minute, is wonderful, but they're pretty clearly in the Liberal fold here. So Carney is not going to go and use them as an example. There are a couple of other provinces in the middle I'm forgetting about, but in terms of national level attention right now, they're not really on the radar. Saskatchewan wants to be, I know, and they're going to have their own issues. But I mean, the feds have been showing some love to some of the agricultural industries that have been threatened. So Saskatchewan's gotten a bit of love. And Manitoba, I haven't forgotten you. You exist, and I love you. But when you start running down the list of possibilities of who should be made the example of here, I kind of keep coming back to BC. And one of the interesting things that we have covered at the line, we've been talking about it, is how David Eby, the premier there, has been going out of his way to portray himself as a Captain Canada. He's even used it as political cover. He hasn't been as obnoxious about it as Doug Ford has, but that just might be a personality thing. But
no, I think it's actually been more obnoxious. He's actually passed some legislation that was.
Yeah, but I'm just okay. Maybe I'm just had too much exposure to Doug. Fair enough. But I think overall, Eby has been using the Trump emergency as cover to walk away from unpopular policies. And Rob Shaw has written about this for us a bit of times. He's made pivots on drug policy, on law and order policy, on mental health policy, on some Indigenous policy. There've been a series of pivots there, but he's dug in on pipelines and the tanker ban. If you're Mark Carney, you might offer him a really nice carrot. Like there might be something that the feds can come up with and say, hey, look, BC, we know, grumble about it all you want. We understand the politics of it. You can grumble, you can cause some minor headaches. But if you actually agree, we're going to give you this nice thing. But there has got to be a stick somewhere in the equation here. And sooner or later, Carney's going to have to use it. David Eby might be the guy to use it against. If you're the Liberals, if you got to make an example of someone, you might want it to be BC. All I'm saying.
Well, and potentially that Eby might be able to use that to his own electoral advantage, right? Like, can Eby marshal the disaffected left and say Ottawa's trying? Can Eby essentially play the Quebec and Alberta playbook? Fellow lefties, I'm taking the fight to Ottawa because Ottawa doesn't respect provincial rights and blah, 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 blah. Can he marshal some of the disaffected lefties in the way that Alberta's traditionally wrangled the righties on that kind of an argument? If Carney's willing to bring the hammer down and say, no, the pipeline's going through and BC doesn't have to like it, then, he might lose the argument. But he might actually wind up giving Eby the ledge that he needs to try and rally electoral support against Ottawa. This has been a very effective political tactic. I apologize for this. I'm being completely spam bombed right now in real time. It's literally my watch and my phone have both exploded. So my apologies. I have muted that mid podcast technical issues. Yeah, look, I think. What was that? Sorry, I think we want to talk about Steven Guilbeault, but the last thing I want to mention before we pivot to that issue, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I know I'm trying to distract from your spam bombing here.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm trying
My
to
air ducts have never been cleaner.
Just look into the camera and don't. Yeah. Anyway, look, the timing of this is really interesting because on one hand, we talked about Carney's leash is starting to run out in order to demonstrate that he's serious about making changes. So he's doing this about a little more than 6 months after he was elected.
Yeah.
He waited until after the budget to make this announcement. Again, I don't think that's a coincidence because when we see people like Steven Guilbeault resign, right? He needed Guilbeault's vote for the budget. So he waited till after the budget. The other aspect of timing that's really important right now is where do you think Danielle Smith is right now? Literally as we speak. Friday morning.
Oh, okay. I don't know. So I was going to say, like, I thought you meant at first, like, I was going to say, like, Cloud Nine. Danielle Smith had a great Thursday, but you mean it in a more literal sense.
She's in Edmonton right now at the UCP AGM, where the rumor has it that like essentially huge parts of the board are about to get taken over by a bunch of separatists. So she's able to go to the UCP AGM the day after signing this Memorandum of Understanding and say, I got the wins. Carney's on board. Right?
Yeah.
Now, whether or not that is going to make any difference in terms of the board elections, I don't know. No one knows. Like the separatists have been quite organized, and a lot of the party the party moderates, I think, have been feeling the pressure to leave, because the people who are, I said, I've made this argument before, but like the people who show up are the ones who make the rules, and it's usually the most extreme, horrible people who are the ones who are willing to show up to things. That's proving, I think, to be the case here.
Well, you know the poem, "The best lack all conviction." The moderates are comfy at home watching on their couches. It's the fanatics who care about nothing else who end up making the decision.
That's right. And so I think that's the dynamic that's now playing out at the UCP AGM, or at least I think it is. I'm not there because I'm recording this podcast, so please forgive me. We'll find out.
Before we go to Guilbeault, though, and I think we both want to go to Guilbeault. Can I ask you an Alberta question?
Sure.
How much of Alberta is sort of mushy middle? And I know, like, the politics of Alberta, I was going to say, the politics of Alberta make it not look like that. But how far will Carney being like, yeah, we're going to do the things we've done, and we're going to try and back you on a pipeline? How much goodwill does that buy him? Not at the UCP AGM, but with people.
It buys him a lot of goodwill among the majority of people who don't really pay that much attention. So that's the monkey's paw problem, right? Like,
you mean the liberal base voter?
Yeah, well, exactly, right. But the no, I mean, look, if you look at a distribution of how Albertans perceive themselves, most Albertans perceive themselves as pretty centrist. It's a standard distribution curve that looks exactly like everybody else's standard distribution curve, but as in all other things in politics, the noisiest extremes managed to dominate the conversation on a lot of these issues. So look, an average downtown Calgary office worker is like, great, good job, Carney. I mean, I even remember having this conversation or overhearing these conversations the last Stampede Conservative Party, like federal Conservative Party Stampede dinner. There was a lot of, even among that crowd, there was a lot of, well, Carney seems fine. He seems okay. We'll see how he does. I
remember at the time you were talking about that, like, and I thought there was a coverage in this week, and I don't know if this was Alberta specific coverage. This might've been more out here in Laurentia or whatever the hell we call ourselves in the abstract. But the fact that Carney got 2 standing ovations at the Calgary launch was like talked about, repeated. It's like, my God, a Liberal Prime Minister has got a standing ovation in Toronto. And then a few minutes, good Lord, he's getting another standing ovation in Toronto. So look, I mean, obviously you stack a room with your supporters there, but I did see some of the press event. Danielle Smith, who is known how to look unhappy next to Liberal leaders, a very carefully studied vision of displeasure. She looked happy, and
I think that
we're
there's
so
a
cynical
genuine
here.
Affinity between them. Like, I don't think there's an ideological affinity, but I think the two of them actually genuinely kind of like and respect each other, at least.
They're doing their jobs
at a professional level. So, there's a positivity there. So an average sort of person showing up to the City of Calgary Chamber of Commerce event is like, okay, great. The people who are going to be reflexively dismissive or undermining of this MOU are going to be the people who it doesn't really matter what Carney actually says or does. They're always going to be suspicious of Carney. They're going to be like, you're going to tell me the guy who wrote values is actually going to get a pipeline across. Like, I don't believe you. And I guess to some extent, the proof is in the pudding. Let's see. Hey, look, if Carney is the first prime minister to get an actual new pipeline built, not just an extension, but a new pipeline built in God knows how many years, pretty hard to argue with that. Although I'm sure some conservatives in this province will try.
Well, I think you were just touching on that a minute ago, right? I mean, standard distribution is a thing. What I was thinking about when I was just listening to you talk there, Jen, is how there are people in the world who have either an ideological or sometimes just like a monetary or professional obligation to take every little bit of news and cram it into a pre-existing set of beliefs, opinions, responses.
Yeah.
One of the things you and I don't have to do here, because I think people can probably take a guess what our politics are, but we're not partisan. We can say when conservatives are screwing up. We can say when liberals are getting it right. And I think the proof is in the pudding right now, because I think Danielle Smith and Mark Carney had a good week. And I've been harder on Carney than you have, but I always try to call the balls and strikes fairly. Carney had a good week. Like this is good. This
is a good week.
Yeah.
For them.
And now, I think it's been well handled.
Do you want to know what really topped the week off as a win for both Danielle Smith and Mark Carney?
And here is the pivot we have been hinting at. Yes. Yeah, I have a hunch, Jen.
Because Steven Guilbeault quit cabinet. Matt, could you, I feel like you, as a Laurentian consensus elite, you're probably better equipped to try and explain to an audience who in the hell Steven Guilbeault is and why and maybe I'm better equipped to explain why he was symbolically significant. Look
at you trying to get me in trouble with our Western-based listenership.
Yes,
Matt, as the representative center of the universe, Laurentian asshole. So look, Steven Guilbeault was an environmentalist activist from Quebec. Mm-hmm. And I can say more, or I can leave it there for Jen's purposes. He was, again, an environmental activist. I'm saying that value neutrally, like that's what he did. He was involved in some high profile stunts when he was involved with Greenpeace. Some of the listeners and viewers would have seen him being arrested, and that was footage that conservative activists trot out occasionally. I don't remember what it was for. It was trespassing for some environmental protest. He is not just an environmentalist in general terms. He is Steven Guilbeault is someone who's passionate about climate change as an issue and carbon reduction. The Liberals recruited him. The Trudeau era Liberals recruited him to be both a senior Quebec lieutenant. I think under Mark Carney, in fact, he was the Quebec lieutenant, and he was also the point man on the environmental file, taking over, I believe, from Catherine McKenna after 2019. He was unapologetic. He was aggressive. And Albertans get pissed off when I say this. I would say he was effective. He was effective in the job Trudeau put him in to do what Trudeau wanted him to do. But I think to your point, Jen, that had the consequence of completely enraging significant parts of the population, not just in Alberta. I think Alberta might have been kind of ground zero for it. But Guilbeault was point man, representative example of the Justin Trudeau environmental climate change agenda. When Carney won 7 or 8 months ago now, time flies when you're having whatever this is. He was bumped out of environment. He was put into culture. And again, that makes sense in the sense of still representing Quebec, right? Like culture is a portfolio that's often held by a Quebecer.
We were so looking forward to the Steven Guilbeault online harms bill. That was going to be a real joy.
I think I was going to go trespass and get arrested on something. Guilbeault was, at the time, they're like, oh, it's not a demotion. Liberal spinners, like 7 months ago, oh, it's not a demotion. We're putting him in a file where we really need someone with his talents. But I think everyone who is not one of those people I was talking about a minute ago, who are forced to accept and advocate certain conclusions, everybody knew that Carney wanted him out of the way. And this is obviously not the first environmental walkback we've seen with Carney. There have been a series of them. The biggest one was zeroing out the price of the consumer public-facing carbon tax. And Guilbeault kind of was unhappy. There were those reports coming out, sources close to Steven Guilbeault, which I always suspected was Steven Guilbeault. He was not happy with the direction this was heading in environmentally. After the announcements yesterday, I could be wrong about this, but I think the Toronto Star Bureau had it first. It was real quick. It was Steven Guilbeault is leaving cabinet. And then probably about an hour later, he released his letter. It wasn't, I'm sure you've read it, but for people who haven't, it wasn't hostile and it wasn't ungracious. I actually think it was a fairly effective political resignation letter. It wasn't, I've lost faith in the prime minister. It wasn't, you won't have Nixon to kick around now. It wasn't bitter. But he basically said, I am very proud of the work that we did. And he enumerated the things he was proud of under Trudeau. And I don't want to be part of a cabinet that's undoing them. And I look forward to representing my district in Montreal. I thought it was, as far as these things go, a fairly gracious letter. Certainly he could have written worse. But I think Steven Guilbeault, and I think this is, Jen, you and I will get into it here. I think this is the meat of it. I think Steven Guilbeault probably actually had a pretty good estimation of what his relative worth is for the Liberals right now. Last year, Chrystia Freeland had the firepower to take down Justin Trudeau. I think Guilbeault looked at the board and was like, no, I don't have that kind of firepower, so I might as well go out with a little bit of grace. You could disagree, but that was my read on how he quit cabinet. He's still an MP.
People like Guilbeault and the rest of the Trudeau era have got to be doing the equivalent of standing on the beach and watching the tide roll out. Like, in a metaphorical way, their influence is just rapidly waning. So look, I think I speak for all of Alberta when I would acknowledge that Steven Guilbeault was regarded as a fucking lunatic, who was one of the most obstreperous, extreme, and massive, obstreperous, extreme, and I would say major obstacles to actually creating a functioning relationship with the Trudeau government, right? So he was the guy who would say, like, look, I mean, I won't speak to what I've heard or understood to be.
I'm sorry, I'm still laughing about that. I keep laughing over you, but I'm still laughing about that because
right. The relationship between Guilbeault and Alberta was toxic. It was not a constructive, let's have a conversation about how we can reasonably reduce emissions while at the same time developing this resource in a sensible, sane way. It was very much a sense that Guilbeault is out to shut us down. And I think that's probably right. I think he probably was. Now, I do recall when Carney was first elected, I'm going to run a victory lap here. When Carney was first elected, I did a kind of a Chatham House Rules panel. And, we talked about Guilbeault. Guilbeault is basically one of the major obstacles to any kind of harmonious working relationship between Alberta and Ottawa consistently over time. And so when Carney was elected, there was one of the major questions was, what are they going to do with Guilbeault? They can't keep him in environment and climate change because he turns this into a non-workable issue every time he's there. This is not someone who's pragmatic and grounded. This is someone who's an extremist on this file. So instead, when he was moved to Canadian identity and culture, firstly, every journalist in the country went, oh, fuck. Because, of course, identity and culture was where a lot of the issues that...
I can confirm that.
Yeah. Identity and culture is where a lot of the issues that affect us and the bills that affect us land, right? So we're like, oh, good. This is fantastic. Love him there. But he was out of that climate change file. And there was sort of some optimism that maybe some movement could start to happen as a result of that. Clearly that optimism has borne some fruit. I remember being on this panel and saying, Guilbeault needs to be taken out back, metaphorically speaking. Like you need to get him out of cabinet. He was so symbolic of the worst tendencies of the Trudeau era governance and how that party functioned at its worst, that you need to, for symbolic and just practical reasons, get him out of cabinet, take him out back, move him out, completely sideline him from power. So instead he was given a kind of, not a demotion, but a different file. And I remember being told at the time, no, even in Alberta, like they can't get rid of Guilbeault. Guilbeault is too central to the Liberal coalition. He's too central to the sorts of people who supported Trudeau. He's too central to organizing in Quebec, and he's too central to sort of the environmental movement. If you were to get rid of Guilbeault, the entire Liberal coalition falls apart. And my position to that was bullshit.
Yeah,
I thought that was complete bullshit. And the reason why I thought that was complete bullshit is, one, the coalition, sorry, how do I say this? Guilbeault was central to a group of, an ideological approach to governance that has now been horrifically discredited.
By its own party.
By its own party. Yeah. Like if you talk to sane people within the Liberal Party, there is a quiet acknowledgement that, we gone done fucked up. We didn't. The last several years are going to be regarded as a dark mark in the history of the natural governing party. That whole philosophy of governance that underpin that. I think that's been discredited and is on the wane. Secondly, I'm just not convinced that he's that central to any kind of organizing capacity. I think environmentalists don't really make up that powerful political faction in the country. You poll people and you ask them about climate change, and a lot of them, strong majorities, will say that it matters. But then when you poll them about whether or not it matters more than the economy or healthcare or education, nobody's voting for climate change more than they're voting for the sustainability of their healthcare system. Nobody's voting for climate change over, even military spending at this point. Nobody's voting for climate change over who they think is going to be best equipped to handle U.S. government relations. Everybody believes that climate change is important. Nobody thinks it's more important than everything else. And so the idea that this guy was deeply central to the success of the electoral success of the Liberal Party, I just thought that was bullshit. I just don't believe it. But now we get to find out, because my suspicion is that he's going to be out of cabinet. That's a massive win for Carney, just from a practical level and sort of cabinet functioning level. He no longer has an obstreperous presence that he has to be complacent toward. Carney can now move forward with a much more pragmatic approach to the climate change and the oil and gas file. I think that the Liberals lose nothing by his absence. I don't think they're going to make any significant gains or losses in Quebec as a result of this. And I think it also gives Carney the opportunity to replace him with other people who might be just as well equipped in Quebec, might have just as much credibility, but might not be lunatics.
A couple of things I'm going to say in reply here. Going to do them rapid fire.
But then that's the Alberta perspective. So you take it or leave it.
Well, for what, and this is one of the things I was going to say. So I'm going to reshuffle my rapid fire here.
Okay.
At your request, I gave what I think was a very fair and even-handed Laurentian view of Steven Guilbeault. For what it's worth, I'm of the Alberta frame. I actually like everything Jen, was saying about him basically being like here to shut it down and to be an obstacle to tranquility among the provinces. I agree with that completely. I think Carney probably agrees with that completely. And in a weird way, Guilbeault might too. I felt I would offer up a fairly even-handed summary of the guy, but in terms of what he was doing and the effect it was having, I think Alberta, the generic Alberta view, is pretty much completely in line with the Matt Gurney view. The only thing I'll say is a very partial defense of Steven Guilbeault, and I don't even think this is a defense of Steven Guilbeault. I think it's more an indictment of his former boss, is that I think in the role that, Jen, that you had laid out there, doing all those things that you think are bad, I agree he was doing those things. I agree that they were bad. I also think they're the things Trudeau wanted him to do. I don't think Guilbeault was like a loose cannon. I think Trudeau basically said, hey, I don't care about Alberta. You can go piss him off. I want to be seen as the environmental prime minister, and I want to keep Quebec and Ontario happy, more so Quebec. So I think Guilbeault was faithfully doing what his boss wanted him to do, even though I agree with your summary of it. The thing about climate change you're talking about a minute ago, this is old now. There's probably been more recent polling on this. I should go pester our Ipsos guys. They probably know this. But I remember this great Ipsos poll from years ago that I remember reading about, which was basically a question in a couple of parts. And one of them was like, do you believe that climate change is like an existential threat? And a supermajority of Canadians said yes. And then when you took those people, the ones who said, yes, climate change is an existential threat, and then you started to say to them, would you be willing to spend $50 a year to stop it? Would you be willing to spend $500 a year to stop it? What you actually figured out was that a supermajority of Canadians believed that climate change was going to destroy life as we know it, but that they were not willing to spend anything more than $200 a year. And that's simply not a serious voter coalition. I'm sorry, but that's the example of, yes, a lot of people will tick a box of, I think this issue is important, but if you're not willing to spend more than $200 a year to do anything about it, you really don't care that much. And a voter is not going to care that much about a prime minister who gets a little heavy-handed with their issue that is worth sub $200 to them. So I think Carney's going to be safe on that. The other big issue, Jen, and I wanted to reply to this, is that I think you're bang on here. Quebec will figure it out. The idea that Steven Guilbeault was some indispensable link between Mark Carney and Quebec, to me, I just think is nuts. It's a problem that the Liberals have, Jen. And you and I talked about this a bit before we started recording. Justin Trudeau was able to keep a lid on the Liberal Party for what, a year or two after literally everybody, apparently except Justin Trudeau, knew that he was leading it to oblivion. Trudeau still kept them in line. Are you telling me Mark Carney is not going to be able to keep these guys in line while he's still popular, has years left in his mandate, and is winning? There will be no shortage of Quebecers who are willing to step up and help Mark Carney raise some money in that province.
Look, I just have a lot of faith that Quebec can do better. Look, Quebec.
Than
Quebec
Guilbeault or in general?
Than Guilbeault.
I'd say
Quebec
both.
can do better than. Firstly, Quebec is pragmatic and thoughtful. They know they're going to want to have people in a future Liberal government. They'll put someone forward who's more functional than Guilbeault. Somebody else will come forward to take that gap in the new environment. I just believe that.
Well, you said a few minutes ago, Jen, like standard distribution applies everywhere. Mark Carney will not have a hard time finding an economically pragmatic centrist Quebecer. I have faith in that.
Yeah, and maybe even not a centrist Quebecer, maybe even a more lefty centrist or a more lefty Quebecer with a pretty good track record of pragmatic environmental activism. Like, there's lots of people like that in this country, right? The other thing that I think is interesting is when I go online and look at this discourse about the last couple of days, there's a lot of people talking about, the liberal left will revolt as a result of this deal. The liberal left will revolt at the idea that Steven Guilbeault doesn't have a place for this party anymore. I think the concept of the liberal left is a fiction. I don't think the liberal left exists. I don't think the Liberals are a party of an ideology. I think the Liberals are a practical party of power. This is actually the thing I like about the Liberals, frankly. The liberal left isn't a thing. The liberal left is not a coalition. The Liberals will vote for the people. People who are self-identified liberals usually are, how should I say this, pragmatic centrists who will vote for what they think is needed in the moment. And that means if it was 5 years ago and pipelines were the big issue, they'll vote against pipelines. And if that means 5 years later, the Americans are the big issue and we need to diversify our TFN now, they'll vote for pipelines. There is no liberal left. I don't think that's a thing that really exists, just as I don't think that there's this thing as a red Tory, but that's another debate for another day. Right? This isn't, people aren't divided in this way. So look, I think that all in all, Guilbeault's leaving is a win for Carney. I think it's a win for Alberta. I think it's a win for Canada. I don't know if you want me to go on my little side quest rant, because we're already 40 minutes in to this podcast.
We're only doing two segments. Go for it. What's your side quest?
Okay, so look, there's one final little side quest rant that I will end this segment on. Okay. And that is I read a couple of Substacks that belong to Liberals. And on one of them, I won't say which one because I don't want to name and shame any particular individual. Okay. But there was a comment from one person on one particular Substack that I read. And it was something to the effect of, come and eat the fresh, wild Pacific salmon of Haida Gwaii. Come and eat the wild-caught chanterelle mushrooms of Haida Gwaii, and then tell me that a pipeline is a good deal. And I was so tempted to weigh in, but I restrained myself. But I'm going to weigh in on this podcast. Your fresh-caught Pacific salmon is caught with boats running on fossil fuels. You don't survive on seasonal local chanterelles. You survive on ordinary groceries that are shipped to you twice a day on a diesel-fueled BC fucking ferry that you would not be able to survive on. Most of you would not be able to survive on Haida Gwaii without total and utter independence on a very high per capita GHG emissions lifestyle. If you were serious about about personally reducing your carbon emissions, you wouldn't be living on the BC goddamn islands. You'd be living in downtown Toronto, which has the lowest per capita greenhouse gas emissions in the country as a result of nuclear power. Okay? And by the way, when you die, you're probably not going to wander into the wilderness to die. You're going to want to be well cared for in a nice long-term care facility that is amply provided for by the Canadian taxpayers. Okay? So these people want to live a rich life, but they never want to see the bill. That's my issue with it. These people want to live a fantasy of like, I'm living off the grid. If only you knew the beauty of the BC West Coast, blah, 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 blah. But none of them want to acknowledge that everything about that lifestyle is subsidized by an extremely high greenhouse gas rich economy, right?
Well,
none of them actually want to make the sacrifices that would be required of them to live low greenhouse gas emissions while they claim that this is central to their economy. While they claim this is central to their values, as evidenced by the fact that they live on the West Coast. Something most of them would never be able to do if they hadn't made more money in more economically productive parts of the country at earlier phases in their lives. And I just think that there's something about that hypocrisy that I think we have to start calling out, because that kind of gross sentimental nonsense is what's preventing us from having real conversations about what this country needs to do economically and real conversations about what this country needs to do environmentally.
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up after this, but I have three quick things I'll say in reply. First of all, when you were saying a minute ago, you're probably not just going to wander off into the wilderness and die. Stop threatening me with a good time. I've definitely been thinking about that. More seriously, like we talked a lot about healthcare last week. Healthcare was a big topic for us last week. And it was interesting for me to just, you probably saw some of this too. The reaction to our podcast last week, especially on the healthcare front, was quite intense. Like there was in our dispatch as well. Definitely this is debate, I think, that's simmering in this country. But every once in a while, when you have the healthcare debate, someone comes along and goes, I don't know what you're so worried about. In 2004, when I needed my knee replaced, I had excellent care. And like, well, that's great. Like, I'm glad. The thing is, there are like, yeah, and there's and it's just as an objective fact, there are hundreds of thousands of people in this country who are basically effectively blocked from care due to bottlenecks in diagnostic tests and transfer to other facilities, or even just hospital overcrowding. But like, there are certain people, it's not that they're wrong that bothers me, because everybody's wrong about things. I'm sure I'm wrong about things. It's the sneering condescension about people who are concerned about their economic or their medical situation now because it worked out well for them before.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say, and you had said this commenter who was like, come to BC and eat the salmon and eat the mushrooms and then tell me a pipeline's a good idea. I will take that as a literal offer. I will go to BC. I'll enjoy the seafood. I'll have the fresh greens and local mushrooms, and I will tell them a pipeline is a good idea. If anyone wants to take me up on that, I'm in.
Look, I mean, here's the thing that I think that we have to get serious about, and that is we think of ourselves and we want to live like we're a rich country, while at the same time adopting and chasing the policies that would make our country poor. Yeah. You can't have, at a certain point, there's a tension there that breaks. You can't claim to be morally superior because you live in Haida Gwaii or Salt Spring Island or any of these beautiful places in the world.
Yeah.
When in fact, the only reason why you can maintain any kind of normal quality of life in those places is because you have a disproportionately absurdly high per capita GHGs. Like, BC Ferries does not run on air, motherfuckers. Like, you know what I mean? Like these are very expensive, high energy processes and will be for the foreseeable future. Okay. And I have no problem with, like, I wish I lived in Salt Spring Island. I can't afford it. I wish I could. Like, they're beautiful places to live. They're wonderful.
But they're expensive.
But you can't pretend to be morally superior by virtue of the fact that you're surrounded by natural beauty when your lifestyle is not actually congruent with maintaining that natural beauty. Yeah. You're just fooling yourself at that point. And secondly, like, everybody wants the healthcare. Everybody wants the good schools. Everybody wants the social safety net. I'm sorry, that does not come for free. We have to be a high productivity, wealthy society to afford those things. And a wealthy, high productivity society, it means that we have to be able to build pipelines. We have to be able to mine the resources that we have. And frankly, like, the productivity part of that equation matters too, but that's a podcast for another day.
Absolutely.
We can't all sit on our asses and do nothing and do nothing and have these beautiful lifestyles.
Yeah.
And expect those lifestyles to perpetuate themselves into eternity.
But
like, everything has a cost here.
Yeah, you said the magic word, expect, right? I'm going to say it one more time with feeling. Our expectations were a problem. We were rich for so long, we just figured it was a natural state of being. and we didn't need to take care of it. Like, it's just, well, that plant has always been there. We don't need to water it. Now the plant's dying. We're like, well, shit, our plant. But yeah, we're stupid.
But
We're
look,
spoiled and stupid.
And people will live the fantasy that we're a rich country right into poverty. And that I think is what's frustrating. And like, I'm sorry, I understand the sentiment and the feeling behind that, but we are no longer in a position as a country where we can take that kind of sentiment seriously. That is not a serious conversation about economic policy. And frankly, that's not a serious conversation about environmental policy either.
Sign me up for the salmon, and I will tell them all to their face that they should have a pipeline. Anything else you want to put a pin on that and come back and talk a little international affairs? We're
going to talk a little bit about international affairs. We've been rambling on, though. That's a long segment.
We covered a lot of ground, though. So
we did.
Stick around. Right. We'll be back in a minute. This is The Line Podcast. Matt Gurney, Jen Gerson. Check us out. Readtheline.ca. Like and subscribe. We'll be right back.
Matt, you are now back from Halifax, are you not?
Yep. No, I'm right back in the basement bunker here. I'm going to write this in one of my dispatches, but just shout out to the Atlantic Canadian listeners, particularly any Haligonians who are hearing this right now. Halifax is amazing. Like, every time I'm there, I'm looking around. I'm like, I get it. While I was there, I got together with an old buddy who I'd met through journalism, who's now out there in Halifax full time. I tell you, Jen, the more time I spend in some of the smaller Canadian cities, the more I like them.
Oh, yeah. I totally expect that both of us will be retreating into the wilderness in short order. How's the lobster? Yeah, maybe to die. I mean, we can't rule it out. How is the lobster?
Oh, it's fantastic. And like, this is the scintillating Line Podcast content the listeners count on. I love seafood, but I'm kind of the only person in my family who does. So you put me in a city where I have an opportunity to eat it at every meal. Guess what? I eat it at every meal. And it's such an interesting thing, the conference, the Halifax International Security Forum, because you pull all these people from all over the world who have incredibly serious things to talk about. And at every event, they're always like, my God, the scallops are fantastic. Like, we're going to talk about the threat of drone warfare in a minute, but have you tried these? They're great. And I think Halifax, putting it in Halifax was an inspired choice. And it's the conference, the forum has been going on for years, but it's geographically located conveniently between Washington, D.C. and London, basically, right? Like, it's a natural place to do it. But it's also an incredibly charming city. Can I just note for the record, though, that it's a lot nicer in the summer than it is in November? I don't think I showed you the picture.
It can't be that bad. It can't be worse than, I mean, I looked at, there's a foot of snow outside, Alex, or like, I can't, my poor husband, Alex, has been shoveling multiple times. It can't be worse.
Cold North Atlantic rain blowing in horizontally to the ground. But
do you know how many oysters I can murder at a single sitting? I don't know.
No, but I'd like to find out someday.
I think that basically, I had some beautiful little heritage home somewhere just outside of Halifax, and I got to live there in cozy little and just never leave the house during the winter, and then just eat lobster and oysters nonstop. I'd be a happier person, not this bitter, bedraggled Albertan. I wouldn't care about oil anymore. I'd be like, I don't give a shit. Like,
I'll tell you more about the forum in a minute. Can I
make the pipelines up? Who cares? I've got oysters.
Let me make an observation that was interesting. And I'd be curious, because I know we do have some listeners in Halifax, so shout out Halifax. One of the things I noticed was, because I go to this thing every year, Halifax was noticeably cleaner this year. Fewer homeless, encampments have been cleared out, smaller protests. Maybe that was related to the kind of the Gaza war having wrapped up. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But last couple of years when I've been there, and I like Halifax, I'd been looking around going, ooh, seeing some signs of decay. Halifax was showing some of the same signs of decay that had become normalized in Toronto. This year.
And Edmonton and Vancouver and all of that.
Yeah. This year, it looked better. And I'm sure locals can rush to inform me all the ways I'm wrong. I'm sure they can come up and tell me, actually, no, in fact, you just weren't in the right areas. Fair enough. No, I get it.
Line locals, like make the pitch. Make the pitch for me to move to Halifax. I'm listening. I'm receptive.
When I did talk about this with some of the locals, that included hotel staff, cab drivers, things like that, I said, hey, this place is really cleaned up. The number one thing they identified as the cause is that over the last few months, the government has been moving more aggressively on encampments. And they're not just busting them up and imprisoning people. They actually have a strategy to get people into housing. And me as a guy who gets to see Halifax 3 or 4 days at a time, once, maybe twice a year, this time it was a noticeable difference. It's just a snapshot. I get it.
What you actually mean is that the government has used its oppressive force to discriminate horrifically against the differently homed.
Yeah, I was going to say the unhoused, but I think differently homed is a more humane way of putting it.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So just interesting.
Much to the detriment of the community as a whole.
Oh my God. It's stepping out of Toronto into a clean city that is running well is eye-opening.
Fuck it. Let's go. Let's Halifax, the line, Halifax. We can do it.
You know, the irony of it is here, Jen's going to have a rant. She's going to unleash a rant on me. I think I would rather go to a very rural area. And then
there are very rural areas near Halifax.
Well, I was going to say, but then I would turn into one of those obnoxious schmucks who looks at a pipeline and goes, "Come eat the salmon before." So
look, all of us know where this is going. We all know that like both of us will retire in a rural area that is surrounded by natural beauty. And then we will be the obnoxious person leaving comments on other people's whatever Substack is then basically being like, you kids don't know what's what. You can't eat money.
Yeah. Come eat the locally grown mushrooms before you build the hyper corridor to Mars. How dare you?
How dare you? You know, money's not everything, you can say comfortably once you're old.
Once
and
you have
lots
a lot of it. Money loses its value as soon as you have enough.
If only you could understand what a beautiful thing it is to sit in my beautiful, fantastic, overpriced heritage house, able to live off a meal of lobster and oyster every single day, you would understand the terrible evils of the modern infrastructure that is absolutely required to support that lifestyle.
These heathens are destroying the earth. I say from my renovated 18th century church, which is now my home, with a Starlink on the roof and a freezer full of Costco appetizers. Yeah. At this point, should I even mention the forum? We're kind of going.
No, we've really channeled some millennial resentment at the crowd here. So like let's pivot. Let's pivot strong.
So I am working on some columns as I do every year. I go to the forum every year and I come back and I write some columns about it. And what I always do is I kind of break them into themes. And I don't want to give away my last two themes, but do you want to hear what the first theme is going to be?
Mm-hmm.
Bit of a spoiler of an upcoming Matt Gurney column. Wow, the Americans are gone.
Yeah, we knew that was going to happen.
Oh yeah, and it was 100% we knew it was going to happen. Like, and I'll explain the context of this a bit more when I write the column. But there are a couple of very large annual security conferences. There's one in Munich. Halifax is a big one, where people who are either in the military or in the security space or kind of in the blob of industry and NGOs and think tanks that are sort of in that orbit, plus a bunch of journalists. They show up at these things and there are panels where we talk about emerging technological threats, emerging political threats. We talk about battlefield developments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these have been, I think, useful things. I'm not a huge believer in general of getting a bunch of government officials in a room to have a confab, but I do see value in getting a bunch of people from all over the world who are not in government together to talk about these things. Interesting connections are made. There has been an overwhelming American presence at the Halifax Forum going back for years. Military
they also
officers,
like lobster and oysters. Let's be clear.
Oh yeah. Well, hey, who doesn't? Gone this year, and not by surprise and not by coincidence, because do you remember when Vice President Vance basically went to Munich and told them all to go pound sand?
Yes, and how that they were leading, we call that the projection speech, in which he warned them all of their future authoritarian tendencies, and lack of free speech was leading them to a dark authoritarian path.
So that was fun. And then Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense / War in the United States, had basically said, you can't go. Like, he issued like a directive to U.S. military personnel. I'll put this in the column. I'll give you the actual details of it. There was a very thin veneer of it's not a good use of money. We're focused on things that matter to Americans. But really what it was a rejection of 80 years of the post-Second World War alliance system. It's America's not interested in hanging out with a bunch of weenie Canucks and Euro losers because we're too macho and masculine now. Now, there are a ton of Americans who are at this
clearly.
thing.
There's nothing really that America's giving off right now more than the macho, strong masculine energy. Yeah, exactly. That's definitely the energy I'm picking up.
There were a ton of Americans here at the event, and they were former government officials. They were NGO, think tank types, academic experts, industry experts, right? Because American companies, they still want to sell weapons, and there's plenty of would-be buyers there. One of the things, Jen, and I'll be curious to see the response to this when I write the column, and I'm curious to get your response from it now. The Americans who were there, and I say this with 100% respect and admiration for them, they are believers in the post-World War order. They are believers in the Western Alliance. They are believers in democratic norms. They are completely in denial and out to lunch. And
it's frog and pot.
Yeah.
This is all gonna blow over and get normal in a couple of years. You just wait till the midterms.
There was a you know what? Look, some of these events are off the record. Some of them are Chatham House rules. So I have to be real careful what I say here. But Jen, what you just said sarcastically was almost verbatim, pretty close to what I heard a former senior U.S. government official say. And I was about to interject when someone else did, a relatively senior military officer from a large European country who took this person apart piece by piece. And basic, like, I'll tell you when we're not recording, the actual words that were used, it wasn't the kind of language that is unheard of on the Line podcast, but I just have to respect the confidentiality of the proceedings. But let me just say, a senior European military officer told a now former U.S. government official in exceptionally blunt terms that no matter what happens at the next midterms and no matter what happens at the next presidential election, that the bonds of trust between the Europeans and the Americans have been destroyed. And that was what I thought was interesting. I still think that there's a lot of Americans. I could be cynical and I could describe them as Democrats, but I don't think it's entirely partisan. I think it's more of a mindset than it is a partisan affiliation, although there probably is growing overlap between those things. But just the intensity of that Europeans' response to me, like, it felt great. Like they were channeling my feelings, but it was just, okay, Democrats win big at the midterms. Democrats win big in 28. I think both of those things are less than assured, but let's say hypothetically it happens. And then a bunch of Biden era, Obama era, even McCain or Romney era political figures show up and go, sorry, world, we had to sort some stuff out, but we're back now. I think the response to America would be less than polite. And that doesn't mean
so here's two questions. Okay, one, are the Americans present at these things? Is that denial or is it spin? Because it could be either. But I understand the denial. I understand the desire to be like, look, this is a short-term thing. It's going to blow over. Whatever. We're going to be fine. But there's also an argument for spin of that nature, because if you are somebody who works in a sort of a more left-wing capacity or maybe a more technocratic or professional capacity in the United States, you want your allies to just basically hang tight. Let's not break anything here. We'll resume normal functioning in 2 or 3 years. Just let's let this little fever dream pass, because the reason why you want to do that is you're minimizing consequences. You're minimizing the consequences of the breakdown, right? So you want to set people up for an expectation that in 2 or 3 years, we're going to move back to normal. Like, I'm sorry, this has gotten all messy. We're going through a thing, but you know what? We're going to continue to be friends and go back to a more normal order in a really short order. Just hang tight, right? Because that means that the consequences of the breakdown of trust that you're talking about are minimized, right? A lot of people are, I think, working behind the scenes to try and maintain something of America's alliances and relationships.
Yeah, 100%.
not in opposition to the Trump administration, but certainly despite the Trump administration. And they're trying to do this for the good intentioned reasons, because those alliances benefit America in the long run, right? So that's a possibility. And then the second question I have for you has slipped directly from my brain because I'm an old woman now.
I'll answer the first one, and you can maybe recall the second.
Okay. The other thing was about the military people have to be more pragmatic and real than politicians, and they have to be more pragmatic and real. This is just from what my own personal experience. They don't have the luxury of bullshitting themselves. Mm-hmm. They have to be able to functionally look at the reality on the ground and make decisions in real time based on what they see. They don't have the luxury of virtue signaling, for lack of a better term. They don't have the luxury of engaging in all talk, no gumba. Like they have to be pragmatic about what the risks and the realities of the situation are. And as a result, I often find that people who are in a military capacity or attached to military capacity are much clearer-eyed than almost anyone else about political realities, about logistics, about, geopolitical movements, about how people function and how they work. I generally trust like a general's political assessment over a political strategist's political assessment for this reason. It's just a training. I think it's a training thing.
I think let me tackle the second thing first, and then I'll get to your first question. First of all, I completely agree, and I think it's people either in uniform in the armed forces or more broadly in the national security space. These are not jobs that reward theoretical thinking over practical experience. Right. And the young lieutenant who is very good at theory but not good at practical stuff does not grow up to become a general. So I think probably the armed forces in general do attract a certain personality type. And then once that's like the first filter. And then once you've gone through that filter, you then have the ones who are good at going through the experience of actually rising up to become a senior officer. And I'm not saying there's not political dead weight in the flag and general ranks, because there definitely is.
See, Steven Guilbeault is not surviving in any military for very long.
No, probably not. And so I think you're fundamentally correct about that. That's not to say that militaries don't have their own internal politics and their own dysfunctions, because they do.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
But as a mindset, yes, you are correct. And I think there at Halifax and in other places I've been, the people that I think have figured it out the fastest have been people who are either completely exposed commercially. I think business people are often quite ruthlessly pragmatic because they have to be, or it's been people in the defense and security space.
But even business people, it's certain types of business people. It's like business people who do business, like import exports that are tariff affected. Yeah. It's not like the second degree removed business or financial trader on Bay Street.
Agreed.
Yeah.
To your first question, spin versus denial. It's obvious. There's obviously a component of spin. There 100% is. I would say, should I actually spoil something that is, you know what? I can't. I'm going to have to go back and check my notes to make sure that this was for attribution. But let me just say, there was a representative of a large American company that was there, and they were extolling their utility as a service provider for national security operations, not weapons, more in the technical space. Mm-hmm. And they were asked some very pointed questions. And if I can confirm that this part was on the record, I'll quote it verbatim when I write about it. But they were asked about whether or not there is a danger that the White House one day goes to an American company and goes, we don't want you to provide defense services to this allied country anymore because one of their leading columnists wrote something and now the president's angry. And I think that's a very valid.
Wow, what a totally inconceivable scenario.
And the defense industry representative gave a very thoughtful, careful answer that was technically accurate and complete bullshit. Because the answer was never? Well, the answer basically, and again, I'm just being careful here, amounted to that would fall outside the law of the United States. That is not something that would exist
For
outside
now.
of it.
Oh,
Well,
it's not like the United States has ever been known to do anything that's lawless.
but I also think, Jen,
you're right. We can have faith in that.
I think that misses the point, though, more because not everything that happens because of an official signed memo or directive.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of ways for a large American company based in the United States to get the message that it would be in their commercial interests to stop providing support services to another country. It could be contracts. It could be contracts not being awarded. It could be competitors being favored. It could be board positions for members of that person's family. That's more the way the Trump guys operate here. So do I expect one day to see a White House directive ordering large American companies to abandon all their service contracts to Europe? No. I do think the American C-suite guys might start figuring out real quick which countries they no longer wish to do business with because they've angered the president. So to that point, 100% there is spin. I also think, to your point a minute ago, for some of the former government types, there might be some spin as well because they're political operators and it's in their own commercial interest to remain viable, to be considered in the loop. So there's a degree of spin there. But I'll tell you this, I've been spun before by professional spinners. My assessment of some of these guys, Jen, was that some of them are in denial. And I'm not saying there's zero spin, but I don't know if it's broken through yet how even if President Newsom 3 years from now starts completely reversing everything that we've seen over the last year, what country today would ever look at the Americans as a safe bet again? It took 80 years, almost 100 years, for America to build up a huge reservoir of goodwill. I don't think they've spent it all, but I think they've spent a lot of it.
I think it's going to be hard. Like, I think Canadians of our generation are going to remember the current moment, and that's going to color our perception of the United States for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
We're 40. So, I think that America is going to have to probably spend. Yeah. So I think America is probably looking at returning to the normal that existed 2 years ago. If they choose to do that, when they choose to do that, they're probably looking at a 30 to 40 year project.
Mm-hmm. And that is, of course, assuming that returning to normal in 2 or 3 years is an uninterrupted process, because if President Newsom gets blown out of the water in 32 by Donald Jr., and then what is the rest of the world supposed to make of that?
Yeah, we're back to square one.
And I think you've said this really well, Jen. I think you have articulated this really well. And I was thinking about you at one of these events where I watched this European just take the legs out from under this American. You've said it so well before, Jen, where you've said Americans don't think other people are real. That America is so powerful and so rich and so influential that they honestly believe that the mere awesomeness of their American passport or whatever, the sheer power of their George Washingtonism, will be enough to win. And then they're surprised when it doesn't work.
We're going to smack you in the face and be offended when you hit us back.
Yeah. And I think I was seeing some of that. And it wasn't that they were piqued. They weren't angry at it, but they were just a little bit baffled that the rest of the world isn't viewing this as some internal American squabble that's inevitably going to sort itself out, and then some Biden analog will be the next president. Like, the American focus on this, and I understand this, and we would be no different, is 100% through an American lens. And they're thinking about this in terms of, okay, how are we going to win in 26? How are we going to win the midterms? How are we going to compete with Trump on trade issues? Like, what's the Democratic answer to tariffs and MAGA and border issues, blah, 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 blah. And I know why they're thinking about this. I get it. But the problem is, I think they assume the rest of us are looking at them and going, oh, no problem. They'll get this sorted out. And then
this is I don't know. Maybe there's better historical analogies, but this strikes me as being one of the key weaknesses of all empires. Right? Mm-hmm. Like you see, if you exist in an empire, you exist in a world unto yourself, and as a result, you lose. I think that you lose track of how other people function and how they think. And to be fair, I think America's invested a lot of time and energy into State Department, into its military, into institutions that were designed to try and fill this particular blind spot. And those institutions and they're really good at it.
Yeah.
And those institutions are in the process of being undermined and hollowed out. And that's going to leave America with an extremely powerful blind spot going forward. I mean, one of the great advantages we have as Canadians, like, yeah, we're smaller, we're poorer, like, we're less productive, we're less innovative. We've got a lot of problems that we have to fix internally.
You're getting to the advantage part, right?
But we're getting to the advantage part. The advantage part is that we see Americans and they don't see us. Yeah,
no, I agree. Yeah.
Right? We see what they are, I think, sometimes better than they see themselves. Yep. And they forget, and we're just an anonymous little hat that exists on their head. Like this is one of the benefits of being a satellite to empire, right? You have to be really clear-eyed on what the hell is going on in America if you're a Canadian and you want to be able to operate at any level, from media to business to government, right? You need to be able to be clear-eyed about it, because you don't have the luxury of self-delusion. You need to be able to guess correctly if you want to survive. That means we're clear. We get their media. We absorb their media. We understand how they see themselves. We get it, but they don't see us at all.
I think I'm not going to spoil. I've already spoiled my first column a bit. I'm not going to spoil my second one, except to say you will not often hear me get up on a stage and extol the virtues of European strategic planning. I think for the last little while, the Europeans have been particularly bad at that. And I think Europe, look, I know I sound like I'm a Brexit campaigner now, but like the EU is a very plodding, ridiculous institution in a lot of ways. But one of the thoughts I had coming out of Halifax this year is that the Europeans are waking up a lot faster than they were even a year ago. They are way ahead of where Canada is.
Yep. And we're going to have to too, and we will, because there's going to be no other choices.
Yeah, but have you even eaten the salmon on the BC coast, Jen?
I have, in fact, eaten the salmon on the BC coast. I've also been on the fishing boats in the BC coast and seen how that salmon is harvested and farmed.
America.
I have no delusions about this, and I have no delusions about my capacity to survive off grid in any aspect of this province, any part of this country. There are none. I have zero capacity to survive off grid.
Years and years ago.
I am a creature of the modern world, and I embrace that fully.
I interviewed a prepper years and years ago, a very neutral, even-handed interview. I just wanted to get into his mindset a bit, and he was telling me, come on, anybody can lead this kind of life. I'm like, dude, I got bad eyes and a wobbly knee. Like, I'm not hiking 150 miles to my bug out location. I think there's a mindset adjustment that, in fairness to Canada, I actually think there is some signs of reality dawning, and some of it might have been on display at the Calgary Chamber of Commerce or whatever that was on Thursday. But in general, the Europeans are ahead of us, and they're behind where they should be, but they're figuring stuff out.
All right. Well, that's somewhat heartening. And on that note, I do think that we should say like and subscribe. Check us out, www.readtheline.ca. And thanks for following along.
And eat the BC salmon.
Eat the BC salmon.